today on the triple X factor that we've been sharing in this series. And today I want to pick up with the second law. The first law that we talked about and have discussed is called the law of change. We must apply the law of change in order for us to be able to accomplish and reach actually the first X. And one of the things I will say, because we have three X's, first X, second X, and third X, we're going to teach on the different laws. These laws are progressive. In other words, they take you, the first three that we want to cover, we've already taught on the law of change. Today we're going to begin sharing with you on the law of wisdom. Then the third law we're going to teach at the first X level is the law of stewardship. And we're going to take those three laws as we move into building the second X in our life, and we're going to apply the second X laws as we get there, then to the third X and apply the third X laws. And so today we're going to talk about the law of wisdom, and this helps us in order to position ourselves to move from the left side to the right side of the first X. And so as we talk about the law of wisdom, we're going to start with Proverbs chapter 24 and verse 3. And as we share this is from I believe the Amplified Bible. It says, through skillful and godly wisdom is a house, a life, a home, a family is built. And by understanding, it is established on a sound and good foundation. And then verse 4 says, and by knowledge shall its chambers of every area be filled with all precious and pleasant riches. Now, when we look at this verse, of course, we go back here to the first wisdom and understanding, and then we find knowledge. Really, what we're talking about here is the foundation of wisdom really is knowledge. And so the order that when we talk about wisdom in our life, the law of wisdom, that really wisdom begins when we get knowledge, or I like to say specific knowledge in our life about certain things. And then when we begin to apply that knowledge, then we develop understanding. So in other words, it's not until we start taking the knowledge that we receive and we start applying it that we begin to develop understanding. And then as we develop understanding, that understanding leads us to begin to walk in wisdom. Now, the biggest mistake that many Christians make is they just run over to the corner and pray, God, give me wisdom, give me wisdom. James chapter 1 and verse 5, where it says, if any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God. So that's scriptural, but it's not scriptural just to ask and never to apply yourself to knowledge and understanding. Let me say it one more time. It's scriptural to ask for wisdom. However, most of the time we ask for wisdom in a vacuum. We don't realize that it's important that we apply ourselves to getting knowledge and understanding. That's why Paul told Timothy, he said, study to show yourself a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So in other words, there's a part God plays, but there's also a part that we play. And so really, I believe that as we moved into the law of wisdom, we first of all have to focus on knowledge. And Hosea chapter 4 basically says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. So there's no premium on ignorance. In other words, we need to learn to get knowledge. And one of the sayings that I love to use whenever I'm teaching is that never let it be said that you didn't find out. Never let it be said that you did not find out. In other words, you didn't discover, you don't want to look back on your life. And so, man, I missed a whole lifetime of opportunity because I didn't show myself. I didn't study to show myself to prove a workman that needeth not be ashamed. In other words, we are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. And so it's important that we learn to go get knowledge that we need. I like to say it this way to try to make a point, if I may. Teaching on the triple X factor, now teaching on the law of wisdom, is that most poor people should take a rich person out to dinner and buy the dinner. Pay for the dinner, make sure you buy at least 6 courses, keep them talking, bring in your notebook with you so you can take notes. I remember years ago when I was very young. I jokingly say I'm 39, but I'm a lot older than that now. But when I was many, many years ago, really, almost 40 years ago, I invited a very well-known person to actually speak in a church that I was pastoring. And I remember I wanted to learn from him, and it wasn't another minister, it was a business guy that was actually renting out these Pepsi centers, and he would bring in well-known, high-profile speakers from all over the world and have them speak, and he would rent out these big arenas, and people would pay money and come hear everyone speak. And so I wanted to kind of pick his brain a little bit. I wanted to see how he thought. And I remember I hired a limousine, and a big limousine, a limousine driver, and I told him when I picked him up at the airport, go the long way before we ate, go the long way so I could ask him questions and I remember I brought my journal, I had my list of questions, and I began to ask his advice on different things. Now I'm going back many years now. And I remember every time he would say something, I would write it down. I had my whole list of things that I learned from him when I did that. Today, some of those things that I learned in that limousine ride that I rented to take him in, that I apply some of those principles even today. Because here's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be to a point when I was younger, and still am that way today. Never let it be said that you didn't find out. In other words, so I took somebody that knew more than I did about something, and I went and got the knowledge, practical knowledge from them. And today I'm actually doing myself some of those things that they talked about or that he shared with me. And so I share that with you because it's important that we learn to get knowledge. In fact, I have a little slide here. It shows a guy that's digging for gold. And I say to John, John, I found a gold mine, right? And I say, you can dig all the gold you want. And I say to John, go get a shovel. John comes back to me and he says, you know how much they want for shovels? In other words, he's majoring in minors. He's thinking wrong. It's not about the cost of the shovel, right? It's about there's some gold over here, and you've got to learn to go do what is needed and necessary in order to get the gold. In fact, let me just say this. I commend you if you're watching this program right now because you went and got a shovel. In other words, you're actually applying yourself to learning and understanding, or what I call knowledge and understanding, so that you're able to learn. Now, I love this verse, Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 10 in a different translation. This is the New Living Translation. It says, since a dull axe requires great strength, sharpen the blade. That's powerful. That's the value of wisdom. It helps you succeed. In other words, when we get knowledge and then we get in the game and we develop understanding, then wisdom comes in that order to our life, and we're able to begin to apply the law of wisdom. So people ask me, well, Billy, how do I do that? In other words, how do I do what you've done? Or how do I get from the left side to the right side of the first X? Or how do I start building the second X in my life? How you do that is you've got to go find out. You have to function in the law of wisdom in order to be able to do that. When we talk about King Solomon, right? The wisest man who had ever lived. And when he prayed, he didn't ask for power. He didn't ask for riches. He asked for wisdom in his life. So the Bible says in 1 Kings chapter 4 and verse 29, and God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. So we know that right here, I want you to see that, we know that God gave Solomon wisdom. In fact, right here, 1 Kings 4 and verse 29. But if we go to 1 Kings 4 and verse 33, what? 5 verses later here, 4 verses later as we look at this, it says that Solomon, in 1 Kings 4:33, says Solomon described the plant life from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls. He also taught about animals and birds, reptiles, and fish. So in other words, where did Solomon learn all of that? Was that God plugging a USB into his head and downloading all of that? The truth is God gave Solomon wisdom, but Solomon had to get knowledge and understanding. He got it because he studied about plant life. He got it because he understood and studied about the animals, the birds, the reptiles, and the fish. In other words, he applied himself to knowledge and understanding. And then as he got the knowledge, he started developing in his life the understanding in order to be able to do what God had called him to do. And so the thing that I want to make, and the point I want to get across to you in this teaching on the law of wisdom is this, is you cannot divorce wisdom from knowledge. So in other words, what that means is you apply yourself to knowledge, then you get in the game, and it's not until you get in the game that you develop understanding. Understanding becomes the foundation then for you to develop in wisdom about a particular thing. Now, I have 4 grandsons, and they all play baseball. And so because they have a good grandfather and good grandmother, I say this jokingly, but I try to buy them the things as a grandfather that they may need in order to learn how to play baseball. So one of the things I did was I actually bought them a batting cage. So I got them this real batting cage that's installed, a big place in their backyard where they can practice hitting. And then I bought a pitching machine, which is called an iron mic. And the iron mic actually has an arm that comes down and releases the ball so they can time the ball from the tip of the arm of the iron mic and tip the ball coming out of Iron Mike's hand. I did that instead of a jugs machine that has 2 wheels that spits it out because they can see it being released from the hand so that when they actually get in the game, they're able to actually time the ball coming. And so it helps them and develops them in their understanding of the timing of the ball. Now, I can get in the backyard and I can turn on the iron mic and let them practice. I can also play pitch with them and hit them ground balls. I can do all those things to help them develop in their understanding of how to play baseball. But what happens in the backyard is really where they get knowledge. It's really at that point where they develop knowledge. They have some understanding, but the real understanding happens for them when they actually get in the game. You have to get in the game. When we start talking about this law of wisdom, you have to be willing to get in the game in order to be able to understand the speed of the ball, to be able to understand the pace that the other players their age or maybe a year older than them move at. And it's not until you get in the game that you actually develop understanding in your life. Now, here's what I like to say about people when we talk about that, God in our life. I want to say this as we're talking about the law of wisdom, that God is no respecter of persons. And what that means is this, is that if he does something for one, he'll do it for the other. And you say, well, what does that have to do with the law of wisdom? Well, here's what I'm convinced of, is that God has this treasure chest of divine connections and what I call God opportune moments, Kairos moments that he's put in our life. And I believe there's this big treasure chest. God's no respecter of persons. If he has divine connections for my life, he has divine connections for your life. And then the same thing would happen, for example, with these God opportune moments. If God's going to give me an opportunity to invest in something, let's say real estate, he's no respecter of persons. If you have an interest in that, God will show you, open the doors and give you opportune moments in order to invest. Now, I want you to hear me on this. What happens to many Christians is God has given the treasure chest, in other words, this treasure chest that is full of opportunity, but most Christians never have even opened the lid on the treasure chest because they have not been willing to function in the law of wisdom in order to get the knowledge and understanding they need to know how to actually open the treasure chest. In other words, it's the law of wisdom that will teach us how to do it. So in the same way I play with my grandsons in the backyard, knowledge and understanding, it works exactly the same way for us. In other words, for us to walk in wisdom, we first of all really need to develop a knowledge and understanding. Now, this is one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible, is in Luke chapter 19. In the Amplified Bible, in verse 44 of, this is the Amplified Classic Bible, it says, "And they will dash you down to the ground, you Jerusalem, and your children within you, and they will not leave in you one stone upon another." And then I put it in red here on the slide so you would miss it. And he put, "All because you did not come progressively to recognize and know and understand from observation and experience the time of your visitation." In other words, there's a treasure chest full of God opportune moments. Those God opportune moments pass us by, they come to our life, but because we did not come progressively to recognize, know, and understand from observation and experience the time of our visitation, we miss it. We miss the opportunity when it comes. Now, you go, "Well, Billy, how does this work?" Well, first of all, look what he said. He says that we recognize and know. We come progressively to recognize and know and understand. See, there's in our minds, many times there's no progressiveness to it. We just plug in the USB and we're just supposed to instantly know and walk in wisdom all of a sudden. No, God's plan is that we progressively come to know, recognize, and understand. And the only way you can do that is get in the game and apply yourself. I mean, think about how many things in your life you've learned that way. When you learned to drive a car, for example, you had to do it progressively. You started off when you were young. You learned how to go with the guy. I remember my mother let me try to drive a car one time when I was 12 years old on a country back road, and thank God I didn't wreck in that particular instance, but I can assure you that I almost did. It was not pleasant, but she did it in a safe place. And I know with our kids, we did it in big parking lots and tried to teach them when no one was around. Because why? Because you progressively come to recognize and know. And that's true because we're talking here about money mastery. We're talking here about the triple X factor. We're talking here about wealth and building wealth and learning to move through the X's in our life. And so it's something that you come progressively to recognize and know. It's not just something you wake up one day and all of a sudden you're wise. It's not how it works. There is a progression that goes with it. And then he says, and you understand, and this is the part we miss. So you've got the progression part over here, but then you have this part over here. This is right here. This is Jesus talking. And he said they come to know from observation and experience. Most of us don't want to invest the time, from observation and experience. In other words, it happens as we get in the game, we observe, and then we apply ourselves to that observation, and we have the experience of it. I say this jokingly, and when I teach on this, that all premarital counseling should happen 2 years after someone is married, right? The operative word there being premarital counseling. In other words, we call it premarital counseling. We're going to counsel you and we're going to give you advice before you get married. But I'm going to tell you, a lot of times in premarital counseling, the couple is not listening. They act like they're listening. They want to listen most of the time. But what they're really thinking about is getting married. The truth of the matter is the best premarital counseling is post-marriage. It happens after they've been married about 2 years. Now we can talk about the counseling that's needed because now they actually know the questions to ask. In premarital counseling, they don't even know the questions to ask. 2 years later, I can assure you there's a lot of questions. And so the point is that's what works for us. As we get in the game and we, through observation and experience, we begin to develop an understanding and a knowledge on how to grow wealth, how to build wealth, how to get started, the very first steps, which in the next session I'm going to talk about. And talk about the steps that you need, the actual practical steps that you need to take. But as we talk about that, we're going to talk about the law of wisdom. You have to do that. You have to apply yourself to come progressively to recognize and know and understand from observation and experience the time of your visitation. Now, I remember several years ago, I actually played baseball when I was younger, and actually played baseball at Oral Roberts University. I signed a one-year scholarship in 1974, going into 1975. In the fall of 74, for a baseball scholarship. It was right before I got married to Miss Becky, and I remember I went to Oral Roberts University to play baseball. I signed a scholarship, and I remember when I was there, I had only, of course, never played college baseball. I'd only played at the high school level in the state of Texas. And back in those days, we didn't have metal bats like they do today. Of course, in the pros today, they still use wooden bats. But in college and high school and in little leagues today, they use metal bats. But back then, it was only wooden bats. And so I remember I went there, and there was 3 other freshmen who came in with me during that time that were on scholarship. And so they had me as the pitcher pitch against the 3 freshmen that were actually, they played in the field. And I remember they put the big catcher up there, freshman catcher, and he was hitting with a wooden bat, and I threw my best South Texas fastballs that I had in there. And on the third one, he swung with a wooden bat, and he hit that ball over the 410-foot center field sign in those days at the Oral Roberts University baseball field. It's a beautiful field today, but I played on that original field back in the 1970s. And I remember when that ball was hit, I looked and I watched it go over, and I said, "Toto, you're not in Kansas anymore." And I remember the pitching coach walked out to me. He was a tall guy, and it's about 6'4" and really, really thin and skinny. And he walked out to me and he said, "Epperhart, we're going to have to give you a new pitch." I remember him saying that, and so he taught me how to throw a slider. In fact, I've got a little picture of a baseball here, and he taught me how to hold a slider and how to throw it. And I remember we went and we played another team that was in Oklahoma, college team in Oklahoma. And I remember I was pitching against them, and I was scheduled to start the second inning. So we were going to play two 6-inning games, and so you had a different pitcher starting every inning in those 2 games. And so I was starting the second inning of that in the first game. And so I remember I got up to pitch, and of course I threw my South Texas fastballs, and I was trying to throw my slider. And the first 3 batters who got up and hit off of me, they hit ropes. I mean, they hit shots. And the bases were loaded. The good news is none of them hit for extra bases, but the bases were loaded. And I remember the coach came out lumbering out to the mound, and he said to me, he said, "Epperhart," he said, "show me your slider." So I held up my hand, and he didn't say a word to me. He just said, "Show me your slider." He reached over, grabbed the baseball, and turned the baseball 1/8 of an inch in my hand. He literally turned my finger and put it on the top side of the seam, which is in this picture here, and he moved it up 1/8 of an inch. And I faced the next 3 batters with the bases loaded, and I struck out the side because my slider was actually working. Now, I say that because all it took was an 1/8 inch of adjustment. Most people think when you're watching this and you're watching me teach this, you think you're a million miles away. But for most of you right now watching me, it's just that next half step. It's just that next step. It's just that 1/8 inch of adjustment that puts you in the right direction. Because here's what I want you to hear me say to you today in this one. You can't change your destination overnight when it comes to building wealth, but you can change your direction. And what I mean by that is as you change and start heading in the right direction, then these things that we're talking about in the knowledge of wisdom, in the law of wisdom, which is knowledge, understanding, and then wisdom, as you start stepping into that, then your direction, you're headed in the right direction. So most of you that are watching this today, all you need is an 1/8 of an inch adjustment in your life to do what God wants you to do. Now, as I share that, I want you to know in the next session, I'm going to give you some really, really practical steps on what you need to do to be able to build and grow in the law of wisdom in your life. We'll see you right back here in the next session.